The year was 1980, the air thick with the humid weight of a Mississippi summer, and a chilling discovery was about to forever alter the quiet landscape. Off a dusty, rural highway, hidden amidst the dense foliage that lined the road near Jackson, lay the grim truth of a life brutally ended. It was a scene that would baffle investigators for decades, a cold case destined to haunt a community and a family with its unanswered questions. This was the beginning of the mystery surrounding Dennis Cole, a story that would twist and turn through the annals of time, only to find its shocking conclusion 40 years later. Dennis Cole was more than just a name in a police report. He was a husband, a father, and a dedicated truck driver whose livelihood kept America moving. His routes were often long, stretching across state lines, but his heart remained firmly rooted in his home. Friends and family described Dennis as a man of integrity, a diligent worker who took pride in his rig and his profession. He was known for his steady demeanor, his reliability, and the quiet strength he exuded. His family life was the anchor of his existence, and every mile he drove was for their future. The trucking community, close-knit as it was, respected Cole deeply, seeing him as one of their own, a reliable hand on the wheel, always ready with a friendly nod or a helping hand. The fateful journey began like so many others. Dennis had loaded his cargo, checked his manifests, and said his goodbyes, promising to be back soon. The hum of the diesel engine, the rhythm of the open road, these were the familiar soundtracks to his life. There was nothing unusual to suggest this trip would be any different from the countless others he had completed without incident. His route was standard, his destination clear, and his estimated time of arrival predictable. Yet, somewhere along that stretch of Mississippi Highway, the routine was shattered. The expected simply vanished, replaced by an unforeseen, terrifying disruption that would plunge his loved ones into an abyss of despair. The discovery itself was a grim milestone. His body was found by chance, by individuals who stumbled upon the harrowing scene in a remote, almost forgotten corner of rural Hinds County. The initial shock reverberated through the small, unsuspecting community around Jackson. Law enforcement officers, upon arrival, were faced with a complex and challenging crime scene. The rural setting, while offering isolation to the perpetrator, also presented significant hurdles for investigators. The elements, the sparse surroundings, and the lack of immediate witnesses made the initial analysis a painstaking and difficult task, each piece of evidence a potential key in a lock that refused to turn. Initial investigations commenced with the usual flurry of activity. First responders secured the scene, followed by detectives meticulously combing through the area. But the remoteness meant fewer immediate clues, and the preliminary analysis yielded little beyond the tragic fact of Dennis Cole's untimely death. Early theories swirled, fueled by the vacuum of concrete evidence. Was it a robbery gone wrong? A targeted act of foul play? Or perhaps a tragic accident, its circumstances obscured by the unforgiving environment? Without clear answers, the speculation only grew, feeding the anxiety that gripped the community. The immediate impact on the small Mississippi community was profound. Fear began to settle in, a palpable unease that etched itself onto the faces of residents. The unanswered questions became a heavy burden, weighing on everyone. For Dennis Cole's family, the grief was overwhelming, raw and agonizing. They desperately sought answers, a reason, anything to explain the senseless loss of their beloved Dennis. Their initial interactions with authorities were filled with heartbreaking pleas, a desperate hope that someone, somewhere, could shed light on the darkness that had consumed their lives. The pain was etched into their very souls, a wound that would fester for decades. For more true crime stories and cold case resolutions that span generations, make sure to hit that subscribe button. The initial investigative efforts, despite their intensity, quickly began hitting dead ends. The limited forensic technology available in 1980 proved to be a formidable adversary. Fingerprint analysis was rudimentary, reliant on clear impressions which were often degraded or non-existent in outdoor crime scenes. Ballistics could identify weapon types but rarely link them conclusively to specific individuals without recovery of the weapon itself. The science of DNA, capable of unlocking so many modern cold cases, was decades away from practical application in criminal investigations. This technological vacuum meant that without immediate, obvious clues or eyewitness accounts, the case was destined to flounder against the tide of its own complexity. Crucial leads remained stubbornly missing. Dennis Cole's truck, his livelihood and a significant piece of evidence, had vanished from the scene. Its absence fueled speculation, suggesting a deliberate act to obscure the crime or a secondary motive for the killing. Along with the truck, any cargo he might have been carrying was also gone. Personal belongings, such as his wallet or any valuables, were either missing or had been disturbed, muddying the waters around potential robbery motives. The few items found at the scene offered little in the way of direction, leaving investigators to ponder what was taken versus what was left behind, and what these implications truly meant for understanding the events of that fateful day. Interviewing witnesses in such a sprawling, rural environment presented its own unique set of challenges. Detective canvassed truck stops, small diners, and gas stations along Cole's probable route, clutching grainy photographs of him and his rig. But the vastness of the rural roads, often sparsely traveled, meant few people were likely to have seen anything out of the ordinary, or remember details that now seemed crucial. Memories blurred, descriptions varied, and the sheer volume of passing vehicles made identifying Cole's truck among hundreds a near impossible task. The isolation that had perhaps drawn the perpetrator to that spot now served as a shield, protecting their secret from prying eyes. A deeper dive into Dennis Cole's life sought to uncover any hidden facets that might suggest a motive. Investigators meticulously pieced together his history, his finances, and his relationships. They spoke with his colleagues in the trucking industry, his friends, and every member of his extended family. This thorough examination aimed to rule out common motives. Was he involved in anything illicit? Did he have personal enemies? Was there any indication of drug involvement or gambling debts? The consistent answers painted a picture of an honest, hard-working man with no known entanglements that would explain such a violent end. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary man leading an ordinary life, which made his murder all the more baffling and terrifying. The shocking incident sent ripples through the trucking industry. Drivers, already accustomed to the solitary nature of their work, suddenly felt a new vulnerability. Concerns about safety on the open road intensified. The Brotherhood of Truckers, usually a source of camaraderie, now shared a collective anxiety. Discussions in truck stop diners turned from route planning to whispered theories about Cole's death, a grim reminder of the dangers that lurked unseen, even in the most routine of journeys. This tragedy underscored the precarious balance between the freedom of the highway and the potential for grave peril. The technological limitations of the era became increasingly apparent as the investigation wore on. Without the ability to perform DNA testing, which would revolutionize forensic science in later decades, valuable biological evidence found at the scene couldn't yield definitive links to a suspect. Trace evidence, like fibers or hairs, could only offer general characteristics, not individual identification. The investigators were working with the best tools available at the time, but those tools were simply not advanced enough to solve a case as complex and devoid of immediate clues as Dennis Cole's. They were fighting a battle with one hand tied behind their backs, hampered by the very era in which the crime occurred. Law enforcement made public appeals, hoping that renewed attention might shake loose a crucial tip. Broadcasts on local news channels and notices in newspapers urged anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. A reward was offered, a testament to the department's commitment to solving the case. However, as the weeks turned into months, and the months into a year, the tips dwindled. The initial flurry of interest faded, replaced by the crushing silence of an unsolved mystery. The public moved on, but for the Cole family, there was no moving on. Dennis Cole's family, despite the waning public interest, refused to let his memory fade. They kept the case alive in their hearts, a constant, painful ache. They made periodic calls to the police department, hoping for any new development, however minor. Their persistence was a quiet, relentless act of love and defiance against the injustice that had consumed their lives. But as the leads dried up, and investigators exhausted every avenue with the resources available, the inevitable happened: the case went cold. The files were archived, meticulously stored away, a testament to the frustration of a crime unsolved, leaving a family to grapple with an unfillable void and an unyielding question: who killed Dennis Cole? The files were archived, meticulously stored away, a testament to the frustration of a crime unsolved, leaving a family to grapple with an unfillable void and an unyielding question: who killed Dennis Cole? Decades of silence then followed, stretching through the 1980s, the 90s, and into the early 2000s. The initial fervor surrounding Dennis Cole's murder gradually faded from public consciousness, becoming another tragic entry in the local police blotter, a grim reminder of a past injustice. For many in the community, it transformed into a whispered legend, a warning about the dark side of rural highways, a story passed down in hushed tones rather than a current event. No breakthroughs emerged, no surprise confessions, no sudden discovery of a crucial piece of evidence. The case remained stubbornly cold, gathering dust in the archives, a symbol of hope lost and justice deferred. The world moved on, technology advanced at a dizzying pace, but for the Cole family, time seemed to stand still, perpetually locked in that summer of 1980. Despite the passage of such a vast expanse of time, the Cole family's dedication to their lost loved one never wavered. Generations grew up hearing stories of Dennis, a man remembered not just for his tragic end, but for the life he lived and the love he shared. His children, now adults, instilled in their own offspring the unwavering belief that truth would eventually prevail. They weren't activists in the public sense, not holding rallies or press conferences, but their advocacy was a constant, quiet hum of persistence. They called the sheriff's department periodically, checking in, hoping against hope for any flicker of new information. Each anniversary of Dennis's death was a solemn occasion, a private vow renewed to keep his memory alive, a silent promise that he would not be forgotten to the cruel indifference of time. Their love became the living flame that kept the cold case from entirely freezing over. As the years marched on, the world outside the Cole family's grief began to experience a profound transformation in the realm of forensic science. The 1990s brought the widespread implementation of DNA technology, a game-changer that allowed investigators to link suspects to crime scenes with unprecedented accuracy. This was followed by advancements in ballistics, digital databases making cross-referencing information far more efficient, and analytical techniques that could extract information from even the most degraded samples. What was once science fiction was now standard procedure, offering hope for countless unsolved crimes. The tools to unlock cases like Dennis Cole's were finally being forged, waiting for the right moment and the right hands to wield them. Coinciding with these technological leaps was the emergence of specialized cold case units within law enforcement agencies across the country. Recognizing the vast number of unsolved murders and the potential for new scientific methods to crack them, dedicated teams were formed. These units comprised seasoned detectives, often nearing retirement, whose experience was invaluable, coupled with younger, tech-savvy investigators eager to apply modern forensic techniques to historical mysteries. Their mission: to meticulously revisit forgotten files, breathing new life into investigations that had long been considered closed and unsolvable. These units understood the emotional toll these cases took on families and were driven by a profound commitment to justice. It was against this backdrop of evolving science and renewed dedication that a specific cold case unit, operating within Mississippi, made the decision to revisit the Dennis Cole murder. The challenges were immense. They faced the daunting task of sifting through decades-old files, many handwritten, some faded, some perhaps incomplete. The original evidence, carefully preserved but subjected to the ravages of time and storage conditions, needed to be assessed for its viability. Could any biological material still yield a usable DNA profile after 40 years? Would the chain of custody for crucial items still be intact and verifiable? It was a monumental undertaking, akin to solving a puzzle with many missing or damaged pieces. Yet, despite these obstacles, the power of preserved evidence proved to be the linchpin. The original investigators, limited as they were by the technology of their time, had nevertheless done a commendable job of collecting and cataloging certain key pieces. There were material samples, trace evidence, and items directly related to the crime scene that had been meticulously bagged, labeled, and stored. These seemingly insignificant remnants from 1980 now held the potential to be re-examined through a completely new lens. The Cold Case Unit meticulously cataloged these items, prioritizing those most likely to contain residual biological material, preparing them for the advanced forensic laboratories now equipped to handle such delicate and aged samples. Then came the genetic genealogy factor, a revolutionary approach that began to transform cold case investigations. Unlike traditional DNA analysis, which requires a direct suspect comparison, genetic genealogy leveraged public DNA databases used by individuals for ancestry research. By uploading an unknown DNA profile from a crime scene, genealogists could construct family trees, identifying distant relatives of the perpetrator. This allowed investigators to narrow down a massive pool of potential suspects to a much smaller, manageable list of individuals. It was a painstaking process, but one that offered an unprecedented pathway to identifying perpetrators who had otherwise vanished without a trace, individuals who had perhaps never left their DNA in a criminal database. The Cold Case Unit's meticulous work and the application of these cutting-edge techniques finally yielded what had been desperately sought for 40 years. An initial glimmer of hope. A small but significant detail emerged from the retesting of one of the preserved evidence items. It was not yet a full DNA profile, nor a direct match to an individual in a criminal database. But it was a partial, tantalizing fragment, enough to suggest that the biological material had survived the decades and held the potential to unlock the secret of Dennis Cole's murder. The silence of 40 years was beginning to crack, and a faint echo of truth was finally resonating from the past. The initial glimmer of hope, that tantalizing fragment of DNA, spurred the Cold Case Unit into a frenzy of renewed activity. A re-examination of that specific, meticulously preserved piece of evidence, originally collected from the 1980 crime scene, now yielded a partial DNA profile. This was the breakthrough, the concrete proof that the science had not only caught up but could now potentially identify Dennis Cole's killer after 4 decades of agonizing silence. It wasn't a perfect, full profile, but it was enough to embark on the next, most crucial step. This minuscule genetic signature, carefully extracted from degraded material, represented the first objective, physical link to the perpetrator since the day Dennis Cole was found. The meticulous labor involved in developing this profile, coaxing usable genetic information from a sample exposed to the elements and time, was a testament to the advancements in forensic science and the tireless efforts of the specialized lab technicians. The journey of that partial DNA profile then began in earnest. Expert forensic geneticists took the fragmented sequence and, using advanced computational tools and statistical analysis, started the painstaking process of creating a usable profile capable of being uploaded to public genetic genealogy databases. This wasn't merely about matching to a criminal database. It was about building a family tree from an unknown genetic sample. The DNA, once an inert piece of evidence, was now a digital roadmap, however incomplete, to a family line. This step alone consumed weeks, requiring precision and an understanding of the unique challenges presented by an ancient, compromised sample. Every base pair sequence was scrutinized, every potential degradation accounted for, ensuring the integrity of the data before it was unleashed into the vast world of genetic information. Genetic genealogy, the cutting-edge technique that had ignited so many other cold cases, was now fully engaged for Dennis Cole. Law enforcement, collaborating with specialized genetic genealogists, uploaded the derived DNA profile to several open-source public DNA databases. The goal was not to find a direct match, which was highly unlikely without the perpetrator having uploaded their own DNA, but to find distant relatives. By identifying individuals who shared significant segments of DNA with the unknown suspect, genealogists could begin to construct a family tree. This process involved sifting through hundreds, sometimes thousands, of matches, meticulously piecing together familial connections, working backward through generations to identify common ancestors, and then forward to potential suspects. This was no quick process. It was slow, meticulous work, often spanning months. The genealogists, acting like historical detectives, painstakingly narrowed down lists of potential individuals from a vast network of relatives. Each branch of the family tree had to be investigated, each name cross-referenced. They used birth records, death certificates, census data, obituaries, and social media profiles, any public record that could help flesh out the lineage. The process was akin to finding a single leaf on a giant, ancient oak tree, then tracing its branch back to the trunk, all while knowing only a small piece of the leaf's unique venation pattern. This methodical deconstruction and reconstruction of family histories required incredible patience, a keen eye for detail, and an unwavering commitment to the smallest lead. As the genealogical findings began to take shape, investigators concurrently started unearthing old records. They cross-referenced the names emerging from the family trees with historical police records, local arrest logs, and any archived documents pertaining to individuals who lived in or had connections to the Jackson, Mississippi area around 1980. The goal was to find an individual who not only fit the genealogical profile but also had some physical proximity or historical connection to the crime scene or Dennis Cole's route during that period. This dual-pronged approach, working from both genetic and historical data, significantly bolstered their ability to pinpoint a viable suspect. They looked for individuals with a history of minor offenses, or even just a record of residence within a certain radius. Slowly but surely, a suspect profile began to materialize. Not a detailed physical description, but a demographic and familial outline. They had an approximate age range, a geographical connection, and a family history rooted in the region. This individual, now an older person, likely had no idea their past was catching up to them. They were almost certainly living an ordinary life, having escaped justice for 40 years, perhaps believing their secret was buried forever with the passage of time. The sheer audacity of the crime, combined with the decades of silence, made the impending identification even more poignant. The suspect, comfortable in their anonymity, was about to face the reckoning of a long-dormant crime. The element of surprise was paramount. The individual who had gone undetected for so long, who had seamlessly blended back into society, was completely unaware that a cold case unit, armed with technology unimaginable in 1980, had been meticulously dismantling the wall of anonymity they had built. This person, perhaps a grandparent, a respected community member, or an unremarkable neighbor, was about to have their life irrevocably altered by a ghost from their past. The passage of time had dulled the sharpness of memory for many, but for the cold case investigators, it merely allowed for new tools to sharpen their focus. Then came the moment of identification, the critical juncture where all the painstaking work converged. The genealogists, with the assistance of the investigators, finally zeroed in on a specific person. Through a combination of genetic probability, historical records, and geographical mapping, they arrived at a singular name. This wasn't just a potential match. It was a strong, compelling identification that pointed directly to an individual whose DNA was now inextricably linked to the murder of Dennis Cole. The 40-year mystery finally had a face, a name, and a current address, bringing the relentless pursuit of justice to the precipice of an arrest. The 40-year mystery finally had a face, a name, and a current address, bringing the relentless pursuit of justice to the precipice of an arrest. Now, with the primary suspect identified through the revolutionary methods of genetic genealogy and painstaking detective work, the cold case unit shifted its focus to building an unimpeachable modern case. This involved not only corroborating the genetic and historical findings but also gathering fresh, contemporary evidence that would stand up in a court of law today. The goal was to leave no stone unturned, to knit together the past and present into an undeniable tapestry of guilt. Every piece of information, every lead, every confirmed detail from the original 1980 investigation was meticulously re-examined through the lens of this newly identified suspect. The cold case unit knew that after such a long time, the prosecution would face fierce challenges, but they were determined to present an ironclad case. Under the cloak of utmost secrecy, a period of intensive surveillance and investigation began. Covert operations were initiated to confirm the suspect's identity, observe their daily routines, and crucially, to collect fresh DNA samples. This wasn't about obtaining a confession, but about securing irrefutable scientific proof. Investigators employed discreet methods, gathering discarded items that might contain the suspect's DNA: a coffee cup from a public trash can, a cigarette butt left on a sidewalk, a hair left on a public bench. Each potential sample was handled with extreme care, preserving the chain of custody and ensuring its integrity for forensic analysis. This phase of the investigation was critical. It was the bridge between a historical genetic profile and a definitive, modern-day identification. The precision and patience required were immense, but the stakes, justice for Dennis Cole, justified every meticulous step. The moment of truth arrived when the newly acquired DNA sample from the suspect was processed and compared against the partial profile extracted from the 1980 crime scene evidence. The results were unequivocal. The new DNA sample unequivocally linked the suspect to the 1980 crime scene with a degree of certainty that transcended any reasonable doubt. It was the scientific confirmation they had worked decades toward, the final, undeniable piece of the puzzle. This wasn't a statistical probability. It was a match, a direct, undeniable connection between the individual who had lived a free life for 40 years and the murder of Dennis Cole. The weight of this discovery was immense, a profound vindication for the cold case unit, and a harbinger of long-awaited justice. The suspect's identity, now confirmed, could finally be revealed. His name was suspect's name, and he was now, suspect's age, years old, living a seemingly ordinary existence in suspect's town, often near Jackson, Mississippi. For 4 decades, he had walked among them, an unassuming figure, perhaps a neighbor, a shopkeeper, or a parishioner, concealing a dark secret. He had built a life, perhaps raised a family, contributed to his community, all while the shadow of a heinous crime lay buried deep within his past. The revelation of his identity would undoubtedly shatter the tranquility of his carefully constructed world and send shockwaves far beyond his immediate circle. His life since 1980 was, by all outward appearances, unremarkable, which made the impending arrest all the more jarring. The potential for community ties was immense. The shocking realization that suspect's name was likely someone known, or at least familiar, to the community, perhaps even to some members of Dennis Cole's family, would ripple through the region. Small towns hold long memories, and the intertwining lives of residents often create unexpected connections. People would scour their recollections, trying to reconcile the seemingly ordinary person they knew with the cold-blooded killer identified by science. This wasn't a stranger from far away. This was potentially one of their own, living among them, carrying the weight of an unpunished murder. The psychological impact on the community, the sudden erosion of trust, would be deeply unsettling. With the overwhelming new evidence firmly in hand, particularly the irrefutable DNA match, the cold case unit moved to secure an arrest warrant. This was a critical legal procedure, requiring a detailed presentation of all gathered evidence to a judge to establish probable cause. The affidavit meticulously outlined the original crime, the stalled 1980 investigation, the re-examination of evidence, the genetic genealogy process, the covert surveillance, and finally, the definitive DNA confirmation. The legal apparatus, slow and deliberate, now moved with a focused urgency, preparing to bring a long-fugitive killer to justice. The warrant was swiftly granted, a testament to the strength and clarity of the evidence compiled. The arrest of suspect's name was a dramatic moment, often conducted in the early hours or at a place of work, designed for maximum safety and minimal disruption. Decades after the crime, the quiet apprehension marked the end of a long and bloody chapter. For the arresting officers, it was the culmination of years, even decades, of their predecessors and their own work, a profound sense of bringing closure. For Cole's family, who were notified shortly after, it was an emotional explosion of relief, disbelief, and a renewed surge of the agonizing pain that had been dormant for so long. The ghost of 1980 finally had a name. The initial reaction from suspect's name, upon being confronted with a 40-year-old murder charge, was often described as one of stunned silence, disbelief, or feigned ignorance. Some suspects crack under the pressure, others maintain a stony composure. But the reality of their past, long buried, had finally caught up. The moment of their apprehension, looking into the eyes of law enforcement officers who held the scientific proof of their crime, marked the end of their long freedom and the beginning of a new, public chapter in the saga of Dennis Cole's murder. Justice, though delayed, was finally knocking. The arrest of suspect's name sent a genuine shockwave through the usually placid community of Jackson, Mississippi. For 40 years, the murder of Dennis Cole had been a haunting memory, a cold case relegated to hushed whispers and family sorrow. Now, the sudden, dramatic apprehension of an individual who had lived among them, seemingly without a blemish on his record, ripped open old wounds and ignited widespread disbelief. Neighbors, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances struggled to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the brutal crime he was accused of committing. The news spread like wildfire, reigniting conversations in diners, churches, and grocery stores, bringing the decades-old tragedy back into the harsh glare of the present. For Dennis Cole's family, the arrest brought a complex maelstrom of emotions. There was an overwhelming sense of relief, a profound exhale after 4 decades of holding their breath, of living with an open wound. The knowledge that someone would finally be held accountable for Dennis's death was a deep, soul-stirring comfort. Yet, this relief was inextricably intertwined with fresh waves of anger and renewed grief. The pain of loss, never truly gone, resurfaced with raw intensity as they were forced to revisit the agonizing details of that summer day in 1980. The long-awaited justice also brought with it the crushing weight of what they had lost, and the painful reminder of the years stolen from Dennis and from them. It was a bittersweet moment, where closure mingled with renewed sorrow. As the news of the arrest broke, public interest in the cold case exploded. Media outlets, both local and national, descended upon Jackson, eager to tell the story of a 40-year mystery finally solved. The story of Dennis Cole's murder, once fading into obscurity, was thrust back into the national spotlight. Interviews with family members, original investigators, and the modern cold case team filled airwaves and newspaper columns. The community itself became a focal point, as reporters sought to understand how a killer could have hidden in plain sight for so long. This resurgence of media attention brought both validation and renewed scrutiny, forcing everyone to confront the lingering shadows of the past. Investigators immediately launched into a deeper review of the suspect's background. Every detail of suspect's name's life was scrutinized, searching for any prior criminal history, any patterns of violent behavior, or any unusual incidents that might have been overlooked in the initial 1980 investigation. Had there been other minor infractions, perhaps dismissed at the time, that could now be seen as red flags? Were there acquaintances who had always found his demeanor unsettling? The goal was to build a comprehensive psychological and behavioral profile, understanding not just who committed the crime, but why and how he managed to evade capture for so long. This deep dive into his past aimed to fill in the missing pieces that forensic science alone could not provide. The motive behind Dennis Cole's killing remained a gaping question mark. As suspect's name remained silent or offered denials, speculation ran rampant. Was it a robbery gone wrong, the truck driver simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Was there a personal connection, however slight, between the two men that had been missed? Or was it an act of random violence, a senseless tragedy that defied rational explanation? Without a confession or compelling circumstantial evidence pointing to a clear motive, the question continued to haunt the investigation and the community. The absence of a stated reason added another layer of horror to the already gruesome crime, suggesting a depravity that was unsettling. With the arrest made, the legal process officially commenced. Suspect's name was formally arraigned, where he would hear the charges against him and enter a plea. This was the first public step in what was expected to be a long and arduous legal battle. The initial stages involved bail hearings, preliminary motions, and the appointment of defense counsel. The prosecution, confident in their DNA evidence, began the meticulous process of preparing their case, assembling decades of evidence, and coordinating witnesses. The wheels of justice, though slow to turn, were now grinding with an undeniable momentum, setting the stage for a trial that would revisit a crime committed in a different era. The weight of age was an undeniable factor looming over the entire legal proceeding. How would the passage of 40 years affect the trial? Potential health issues of the suspect, now an elderly man, could impact his ability to stand trial or lead to compassionate considerations. More critically, the availability of original witnesses was a major concern. Many would have passed away, their memories faded, or their testimony compromised by the passage of time. The prosecution would need to rely heavily on the preserved physical evidence and the power of modern forensic science, while the defense would undoubtedly exploit any inconsistencies arising from the age of the case. The defense strategy would surely center on challenging the very evidence that led to the arrest. They would likely scrutinize the chain of custody for the decades-old evidence, questioning its integrity and potential for contamination over time. The methods used to extract and interpret the degraded DNA would be fiercely contested, with defense experts attempting to cast doubt on the reliability of genetic genealogy results in a courtroom setting. The battle would be between the cutting-edge science of today and the inherent fragilities of evidence collected in a bygone era, making for a compelling and emotionally charged legal showdown. The defense strategy would surely center on challenging the very evidence that led to the arrest. They would likely scrutinize the chain of custody for the decades-old evidence, questioning its integrity and potential for contamination over time. The methods used to extract and interpret the degraded DNA would be fiercely contested, with defense experts attempting to cast doubt on the reliability of genetic genealogy results in a courtroom setting. The battle would be between the cutting-edge science of today and the inherent fragilities of evidence collected in a bygone era, making for a compelling and emotionally charged legal showdown. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the pre-trial phase involved a flurry of motions, hearings, and evidence submissions. Both the prosecution and the defense meticulously prepared their arguments, knowing the immense stakes involved. The court became a battleground of legal maneuvering, each side vying to gain an advantage before the jury was seated. Attorneys delved deep into legal precedents, arguing over what evidence would be admissible, which expert witnesses could testify, and the precise wording of jury instructions. This meticulous legal preparation was essential, especially for a case spanning 4 decades, where every piece of information, every witness, and every forensic finding would be subjected to intense scrutiny. The legal teams understood that the outcome would hinge not just on the evidence itself, but on its presentation and the ability to persuade a jury of its unchallenged authenticity and meaning. The challenge of time permeated every aspect of the case. Memories, even those vividly recalled in 1980, inevitably fade, distort, or become influenced by subsequent events over 40 years. Witnesses, if still alive, might struggle with the specific details of a long-past encounter. Original investigators, now retired or deceased, could not provide the same fresh perspective they once held. Crucially, physical evidence, despite the best preservation efforts, could show signs of degradation, making its interpretation complex. This inherent fragility of time-worn evidence presented unique hurdles for both the prosecution, tasked with proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and the defense, seeking to sow seeds of doubt based on these very limitations. The legal system was grappling with the ghost of the past, trying to make it speak clearly in the present. The issue of witness testimony proved particularly difficult. The cold case unit had managed to locate a few individuals who were either present at the periphery of the original investigation or who had indirect knowledge of the events of 1980. Their recollections, however, were piecemeal and often inconsistent. Some remembered fragments, others struggled to differentiate between what they actually saw and what they had heard or imagined over the years. The defense would undoubtedly capitalize on these inconsistencies, suggesting that such unreliable testimony could not credibly support a conviction. Yet, the prosecution carefully selected those witnesses whose accounts, however limited, could corroborate some aspect of the original investigation or shed light on the circumstances surrounding Dennis Cole's last hours, always framing their testimony within the context of scientific evidence. Central to the prosecution's strategy was the expert testimony regarding the DNA evidence. forensic scientists and genetic genealogists, calm and methodical, would take the stand to explain the complex science in terms understandable to the jury. They would detail the process of extracting the degraded DNA from the 1980 evidence, the rigorous methodology used to develop the partial profile, and the revolutionary techniques of genetic genealogy that led to the suspect's identification. They would emphasize the reliability of the DNA match, presenting it as an undeniable scientific link that transcended the fading memories and inconsistencies of human recollection. Their testimony would form the bedrock of the prosecution's case, providing the irrefutable truth that had eluded investigators for decades. For Dennis Cole's family, the trial was an unbearable but necessary ordeal. Each day in the courtroom was a reliving of the tragedy, an excruciating exposure to the pain and horror of his final moments. They sat in the gallery, a silent, stoic presence, their faces etched with decades of grief and a fragile hope for justice. Hearing the details of the crime once again, seeing the evidence presented, and confronting the man accused of taking their loved one's life, exacted a profound emotional toll. It was a brutal journey through their past, but one they undertook with unwavering determination, knowing that their presence honored Dennis and underscored the profound impact of his murder. The prosecution wove together a compelling narrative designed to connect the dots across 4 decades. They started with the scene in 1980, the body of Dennis Cole, the initial investigation, and the evidence collected. They then meticulously presented how that very evidence, preserved against all odds, yielded its secrets through modern technology. The DNA profile, the genetic genealogy, the identification of the suspect, and finally, the irrefutable DNA match, each step built upon the last, forming an unbroken chain of evidence. They argued that while time had passed, the truth, embedded in the very cells left at the crime scene, had patiently waited for justice. It was a story of scientific triumph over temporal decay, culminating in the identification of the perpetrator. The defense, on the other hand, mounted a vigorous challenge, seeking to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. Their strategy often involved attempting to discredit the chain of custody for the 1980 evidence, suggesting possible contamination or mishandling over such a long period. They questioned the interpretation of the degraded DNA, arguing for the potential for error in analyzing such old samples. They challenged the novel application of genetic genealogy in a criminal trial, implying it was an unproven or unreliable method. Their goal was not necessarily to prove innocence, but to chip away at the prosecution's certainty, to highlight any conceivable flaw in the decades-long process, suggesting that after so much time, absolute certainty was an impossible standard. Finally, after weeks or even months of testimony, legal arguments, and expert explanations, the case went to the jury for deliberation. Their task was immense: to weigh the decades-old evidence against modern scientific analysis, to reconcile conflicting narratives, and to determine guilt or innocence in a case that had languished unsolved for generations. The jury faced the pressure of delivering justice for the past, closure for a grieving family, and a verdict that would resonate through the community for years to come. Finally, after weeks or even months of testimony, legal arguments, and expert explanations, the case went to the jury for deliberation. Their task was immense: to weigh the decades-old evidence against modern scientific analysis, to reconcile conflicting narratives, and to determine guilt or innocence in a case that had languished unsolved for generations. The jury faced the pressure of delivering justice for the past, closure for a grieving family, and a verdict that would resonate through the community for years to come. The courtroom fell silent, a palpable tension hanging heavy in the air as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict. Every eye was fixed, every breath held, as the words, "Guilty of the murder of Dennis Cole," echoed through the hallowed space. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by the quiet sobs of relief from the Cole family. For them, it was the culmination of 40 long years of anguish, a hard-won victory against the cold indifference of time. For suspect's name, the mask of ordinariness finally crumbled, replaced by a grim realization of his fate. The implications were immediate and profound. Justice, though agonizingly delayed, had finally arrived. With the verdict delivered, the court moved to sentencing. Given the egregious nature of the crime and the heinous act committed so many years ago, the judge handed down a life sentence for the murder of Dennis Cole. The legal consequences for suspect's name were severe, reflecting society's ultimate condemnation of his actions, regardless of the passage of time. There would be no early release, no escaping the full weight of the law, even as an elderly man. The sentence served as a powerful statement: some crimes are never forgotten, and justice will pursue their perpetrators relentlessly, for as long as it takes. For Dennis Cole's family, the guilty verdict and subsequent sentencing provided an unparalleled sense of resolution. It wasn't about vengeance, but about truth and accountability. For 4 decades, they had carried the unbearable burden of the unknown, the gnawing question of who could have so callously taken their loved one. Now, with suspect's name justly condemned, a profound, if bittersweet, closure settled upon them. The emotional void left by Dennis's absence would never truly be filled, but the nagging uncertainty that had perpetuated their grief was finally lifted. They could, at last, begin the process of truly healing, knowing that Dennis's memory had been honored and his killer brought to justice. The community, having followed the trial with rapt attention, grappled with the resolution in various ways. For many, there was a collective sigh of relief, a sense that a dark chapter in their shared history had finally been closed. The arrest and conviction affirmed their belief in justice, even when it seemed impossible. Yet, there remained a lingering discomfort, a reflection on how one of their own could have harbored such a terrible secret for so long. The case served as a stark reminder of the hidden complexities within human nature, prompting a deeper, often unsettling, self-examination within the tight-knit community, a sense of shared responsibility in the shadows of the past. The legacy of Dennis Cole was forever changed by this resolution. He would no longer be remembered solely as a victim of an unsolved crime, a heartbreaking statistic in a cold case file. Instead, his story became a testament to enduring hope and the relentless pursuit of truth. He was remembered as a dedicated truck driver, a loving family man, whose case, against all odds, ultimately found justice. His name became synonymous with the triumph of modern forensic science, the determination of cold case investigators, and the unwavering love of a family who refused to give up. His journey from an unnamed victim to a symbol of justice served as an inspiration. The broader impact of this cold case solve resonated far beyond Jackson, Mississippi. It served as a beacon of hope for countless other families still grappling with unsolved mysteries. The successful application of genetic genealogy and persistent investigative work demonstrated that no case was truly unwinnable, no crime truly beyond the reach of justice, no matter how much time had passed. It underscored the importance of preserving even the smallest pieces of evidence, fostering continued investment in forensic science, and maintaining dedicated cold case units. The lessons learned from Dennis Cole's case provided a powerful blueprint and renewed inspiration for investigators nationwide, reminding them that every file held a story waiting to be told, and every family deserved answers. This final chapter in the story of Dennis Cole is a powerful testament to persistence, to the unwavering dedication of those seeking answers, and to the enduring promise of justice. It reminds us that even when hope dwindles, and the darkness of time seems impenetrable, the truth can, and often will, find a way to emerge. It speaks to the incredible human spirit that refuses to surrender to despair, that continues to fight for what is right, ensuring that no life is forgotten, and no crime goes unpunished indefinitely. If you found Dennis Cole's journey to justice compelling, please consider subscribing to our channel for more true crime stories and cold case resolutions that span generations. And don't forget to check out our next video, where we explore another fascinating case that defied the odds of time.